Hi everyone, hopefully you can all hear me. I had to refresh all my settings, so that was fun. So I hope none of you have that challenge. Um, do we have Karen Hussey? Yes, we do. Karen, good to see you there. Yay, you all seem to be there, hooray. Okay, so I will now introduce the Women in Leadership session. Our first moderator for the day is Dr Karen Hussey. Dr Hussey is Deputy Director General, Environmental Policy and Programs in the Queensland Department of Environment and Science, where she leads the government's policy and programs relating to the Great Barrier Reef, climate change, resources recovery and waste, biodiversity conservation, historic heritage and broader environmental policy, for example, relating to mine rehabilitation, wetlands and migratory birds. Prior to taking up this role, Karen was the inaugural director of the University of Queensland Centre for Policy Futures. Trained as a political scientist and economist, Karen's research focused on policy, governance and regulatory implications of a wide range of policy challenges, including climate change, trade liberalisation, new and emerging technologies, and science and research innovations. In 2019, Karen and Trust CEO Adam Davey and colleagues developed the Churchill UQ Policy Impact Program, an initiative designed to further enhance the Churchill Trust's impact in policy and investment decision making. Please welcome Dr. Hussey.
Thanks so much, Ken, and good afternoon, everyone. Allow me to echo the welcome to country from the opening address and acknowledge the various lands upon which we are meeting today. For me, that's the Juggle and Turrbal lands here in Brisbane. And of course, I pay our collective and most sincere respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We have a terrific topic to explore in the next, I was going to say 2 hours, but it's a little bit less than that now. Of course, the session is on women in leadership, a topic that I'm particularly interested in, not least because I am a woman, but also because on a good day I manage something approximating leadership, or at least I hope I do. We are blessed to have 5 quite remarkable women with us to share their perspectives, insights and lessons learned on being leaders. A very warm welcome to Dr. Fiona Hawthorne, Fiona Guthrie, Anna Marsden, Jo Thomas and Brit Anderson. A note on the format for the next 2 hours. Each of our fearless speakers will talk to us for up to 20 minutes, and we'll kick off with Fiona Hawthorne, followed by Anna, Fiona Guthrie, Brit and Jo in that order. We will leave questions until the end, but we will do our level best to ensure we have about 15 minutes or so for you to ask questions. And then I will do my best to moderate a Q&A session using the platform. And of course, the speakers will do their absolute best to try to keep to time. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce Dr. Fiona Hawthorne. Some of you will know Fiona personally, and everyone else will have read her bio note, as I did. Fiona is General Manager of Hummingbird House, Queensland's only children's hospital. She's been a registered nurse, an academic, prenatal counsellor and bioethicist. But frankly, all of that pales into insignificance compared to her burgeoning singing career. And Fiona, it's only a matter of time before your platform moves from the car to the stage, I'm sure. But she also has aspirations to be worshipped by her children and husband as a living goddess. An ambition that I admit I share, although it does come crashing down every now and again, as it did this morning when I left the house, to the youngest child saying, "God, Mum, you're not going to wear that, are you?" Whereupon I did explain that everything today was happening virtually and it really didn't matter. So Fiona, from one living goddess to another, the floor is now yours.
I'm really grateful. So as you can see, I'm speaking today on compassionate leadership. And first of all, I wanted to just say a huge acknowledgement to the committee for what pivoting, I think, is an understatement for what they've done. So well done to you all. I'm sure it's been a marathon, and you'll all have a well-deserved drink tomorrow evening. Next slide, please, Iona. So before we begin, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. For me, that is the Turrbal and Yagara people. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging community leaders, and through them to acknowledge and pay my respects to all Indigenous and First Nations people who are joining us online today, and to offer my thanks to all of the First Nations people who have taught me some of the leadership skills that I will be discussing today. Next slide, please. So let's start at the very beginning. I think that was a fantastic point that Maria von Trapp made in The Sound of Music to keep the singing theme alive. No, I won't be singing, but I will be telling you a little bit about my journey as General Manager of Hummingbird House. Hummingbird House is Queensland's only children's hospice. That means that we specialise in providing care for children who are likely to die within hours, days, weeks, months, or up to 2 years. When I took on the role of General Manager in 2016, there was no handbook, there was no model of care, there was no other children's hospice like it, and there still isn't another children's hospice like it in Australia, and I'm learning also the world. Simply because of our focus, our three key focus is on providing end-of-life care and after-death care and symptom management for children and young people up to the age of 21 years. We take referrals from 24 weeks in pregnancy and all the way up to 18 years of age, and then we co-plan with the adult services for young people transitioning through to that. When I first opened the service, I was expecting to see potentially around 100 families a year and potentially have the privilege to witness up to 12 deaths per year. Since then, in the last 5 years, we've realised that there's 5,700 families who live with and love a child with a life-limiting condition, and we now are having the privilege to observe and support families through the death of a child every week. Next slide, please. So my advice in the early days when I started this job was pretty sobering. It said things like, leadership is merely letting everyone down at their own pace. Leadership is one of the loneliest places on the planet. And the following two were my particular favourites because they were given with absolute deadpan certainty. Friends will come and go, Fiona, but enemies will accumulate. And then the final one was, they'll love you, Fiona, until they don't. Next slide, please. So let's put that into context. Open a children's hospice, they said, and I have. It has been like making the parts for a bike. And sometimes the bike is on fire, sometimes I'm on fire, and sometimes everything's on fire. However, what it has meant is that I have learnt how to make decisions really quickly, how to prioritise things, and how to bring it all together in such a way that has resonance, I think, for the context in which I practice leadership. Next slide, please. So my first big lessons, the lessons have come thick and fast since January 2016. My first day on site, I turned up in a very professional pencil skirt and blazer and high heels, only to realise I needed to wear a hard hat, a high vis and steel-capped boots because we were still building the service. And if I was going to climb a scaffolding, then my very, very professional pencil skirt was not going to cut it. So I suppose that was my first small lesson. The next lesson was I gave and 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 gave some more. If someone wanted something done, I was there to sort it. If something was, that's what I thought leadership was. I thought leadership was hunting down things, fixing things, going, sorting out stuff and letting the team go about it. In fact, I learnt pretty quickly that what that meant was that all I was doing was infantilizing the team and enfeebling them. Next slide, please. So the turning point was like this guy Sisyphus here was I realised that for about 2.5 years of leading this service and opening the service, that all I was doing was just taking rocks up a hill, and sometimes those rocks were triangular, sometimes they were on fire, sometimes they had teeth, but they just didn't stop. So something had to give, and I knew it couldn't be me. Next slide, please. So the evolution of my leadership style then. So I did what every good PhD scholar does, which is I went to the literature and I had a look around and I sought advice and I sought lots of opinions and things, and culminating in me paying for a professional leadership coach. And some of the work that we did was to strangle this imposter within. And these are some quotes that along the way I felt really resonated for me. So, if you can learn to deal with your discomfort and just relax into it, you'll have a better life. I realized that sometimes the decisions I was making would be uncomfortable decisions for all of us, but I had to keep in sight what our vision, what our mission, and what our goals were, and that was to still be around in 50 or 60 years' time to serve families who will need us. We need to accept that we won't always make the right decisions, that we'll screw up royally sometimes, and understanding that failure is not the opposite of success, it's part of the success, was a really big lesson for me. And then I think Mike Myers speaks really nicely to it, which is I still believe that the no talent police will appear at any moment and arrest me, and that is the notion of being an imposter, I guess. I just had to strangle that imposter within me. And then, of course, the final piece of the puzzle was from my mum, who died earlier this year. But she would always say to me, in all things kindness, darling, even to yourself. Next slide, please. So I then realised that I needed to bring kindness to my leadership style. I needed to bring kindness to my edges, and I needed to bring kindness to myself. So I then had a look around things, and what does that mean? So empathy is this notion that you say to someone, I can't imagine what it's like to be you. I can't imagine what it feels like. I can't even begin to imagine. I don't know what to do. Well, compassion takes empathy to one next step, and that is that compassion is empathy in action. But your actions don't have to be big or life-changing. You just have to do. Stop speaking and say, how can I support you? What can I offer you that will be of use to you in this moment? So we ultimately all want the same things out of life. We want love, safety, health, and happiness. And we want to respond in an appropriate way. With a little practice, we can all become more compassionate towards ourselves and others. Next slide, please. So then I had a light bulb moment. I thought to myself, if I'm showing compassion to families who use our services, why aren't I showing that compassion to myself and to the team? What was it that I was afraid of? I was afraid of vulnerability. What happens if I couldn't? What happens if I can't? What happens if I didn't really? What happens if it all fell down around me? That would be catastrophic. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It didn't. Next slide, please. So bringing compassion into leadership, I found Joan Halifax's work, and I found it very early on, I must admit, in my work with paediatric palliative care. I found it during my fellowship in 2007, but I realised very quickly it had a resonance for the leadership work that I was doing. So many of us think that compassion drains us, but I promise you it is something that truly enlivens us. And that is a quote I go back to when people talk to me about, I don't know how you do your job, Fiona. I don't know how you stand beside a family a week whose child or young person is dying, because compassion enlivens you. Don't ever think that compassion is weak. Compassion is about strength. So I realized that I could have that strength of leadership that is perhaps needed, but also be compassionate. And we believe that it takes a strong back and a soft front to face the world in being compassionate. Next slide, please. So the topic of this presentation is, what is it that I've learned? So I've learned to find your tribe. Bring in experts who are prepared to have skin in the game with you. And this is where I do one of those really, really dangerous things, which is where I name check some people. So I often say that if you come into Hummingbird House, and I'm terribly sorry that we can't welcome you into Hummingbird House tomorrow, but for those of you who are in Brisbane, if you would like a tour, I'd be very happy to give you one. When you step inside Hummingbird House, if you swung a cat, you would take out Churchill Fellows left, right and centre. And those Churchill Fellows who have answered my call and supported me in no particular order are Richard Roylance, Esther Willems, Chris Boyle, my fellow presenter Joe Thomas, Lee Donovan, Matthew Shepherd and Tony Ayres. They have all helped shape me into the leader that I am today. The other thing that I've learned is say what you mean and mean what you say. The team have very quickly understood that you'll never die wondering what I think. And I think that's part of being a compassionate leader, is being able to say, these are my views, this is where I stand, and that there is no grey. Accepting that you are always working in the grey, but if you have to make a decision, then that decision has to come out of the grey. I speak even though your voice shakes. every team member has skills and experiences that have relevance and a place in the conversation. I learnt this pretty early on in my tenure as General Manager because what I learnt was that we had a clinical incident occur, and the analysis of the clinical incident showed me that the most senior person in the room lost situational awareness. They proceeded to do something with a guest that resulted in an adverse incident. However, the most junior person in the room knew that what was happening was going to end up in exactly the way that it did. So I refocused that and I took away the responsibility for training and speaking up for safety from just the senior levels in the team. And I placed now some of this responsibility with the personal care workers who do this particular care all day, every day. So trying to show that everyone's voice is important and everyone has something that they can contribute. In my undergraduate degree, I realised very quickly that Hertzberg's organisational theory was on organisational hygiene, was about jumping for jelly beans. Not everyone is in it just for the money, so I had to work out really quickly what was their jelly bean. And I can tell you right now, when you work for not-for-profit, when you work in a non-government organisation, you're not in it for the money. You're in it for what you can bring and how you can exercise your skill set. The other thing that I learned was never underestimate the value of a supported manager. I cannot even begin to estimate the number of times I've strolled into my boss's office and said, Michelle, I have a cunning plan. And she has backed that plan, even though neither of us really knew what it meant, but we both knew it was cunning and we both knew that we could do it. Next slide, please. So how do I make it work? Yes, I see a psychiatrist every 6 weeks or so. I learnt very quickly that I needed to put my own oxygen mask on first. I learnt very quickly that I needed to, if I'm going to lead a team, I have to lead myself. I have to work out what I'm doing. So I see a psychiatrist. The reason I see a psychiatrist is perhaps I'm crazy and none of you have told me, but the reason I see a psychiatrist is that I need exquisite mental health, and I need to be able to manage myself and my emotions and how I think about things and how I don't think about things, because I can overthink things. So that's about scrupulous personal mental health and well-being for me. Is that I do that every 6 weeks. It's visible in my diary. My diary is public for the whole team, so they can see that I prioritise supervision. It's a Thursday afternoon from 4 o'clock. Next slide, please. What am I still learning? I am still learning that you can't always get what you want. Balancing the possible with the responsible. When I first opened Hummingbird House, I had an OPEX of 3.2 million. It's now kissing 6.4 million. I wish I could pay everyone exactly the hourly rate that they feel that they're worth, but I can't, because I have to have a ceiling on my budget, because I fundraise $2.4 million every year. And if you're sitting out there wondering how you can help me fundraise, I'm going to shamelessly plug our Coles campaign. Please go into any Coles around the state and buy a $2 token. It means it's just a few sausages at Bunnings less that I have to sell. What else am I still learning? Because I said so. I've had a number of moments where I've had to actually just say, because I'm the general manager, that decision rests with me and this is the decision. And I'm really sorry, I can't be as transparent as you would like me to be, because there are other matters that are confidential, but this is the decision I'm doing. I've also learned that I have to walk the walk. I have to be prepared to make the tough call rather than asking someone else to do that, particularly around performance management. I set the practice standards, I set the performance standards, and that if someone is not meeting that, then really and truly, if there has to be some tough calls made, then I will do that. The next point that I've learned is swim between the flags. I think it's the most compassionate thing to do, is to say to your team, this is your lane, this is what you're responsible for. These are in fact your monkeys and this is your circus, but the rest of it is not. So that people know exactly where they can go and where, more importantly, where to put their energy. Which rocks they can pick up to run up the hill. Are they yours, or are they yours to delegate, or are they ours to just leave behind? And the other thing that I'm still learning is to commit to a just culture, which I don't have time to talk about today, but it's the notion of looking at how the system and circumstances conspire with someone's best intent to create adverse outcomes. What is the responsibility of the individual within the ecology of the system, and how did we find ourselves in that moment? So I find myself asking people an awful lot, did you really mean to do that? Can you talk to me about the circumstances under which this occurred? And also, I spend a lot of time asking people to just be reminded that, is that your story to tell? Are you telling someone else's story? If so, then please don't. Next slide, please. So what the past 6 years have taught me is that compassionate leadership is the skillful balance between creating safety for a team to make mistakes and to push those boundaries, not punishing them for the mistakes, not punishing myself for mistakes. There is no rule book when you open up Queensland's only children's hospice. I'm trusting the team to know the boundaries that we need to go for, and I'm trusting myself to have the prudence around what is responsible, but what is also achievable. I'm looking for the lessons in every experience, good and bad, and creating a work environment where the team knows you will really lead them when they need it the most. Next slide, please. So my final thoughts comes from the glorious Tom Waits. Don't plant your bad days. They grow into weeks. The weeks grow into months. Before you know it, you've got yourself a bad year. Take it from me, choke those little bad days. Choke them down to nothing. Next slide, please. Over the last 6 years, I've choked a few weeds. I've allowed a few weeds to get the better of me. I've been stung by a few, but I'm still standing and I'm still leading the team, and there hasn't been a revolution, so I think I'm doing okay. If you've got any questions or you're interested in speaking with me, here are my contact details. If not, I can be found through www.hummingbirdhouse.org.au. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. Thank you for your interest in hanging in there. I watched the numbers go up and go down, and Joe, we didn't lose any. And I look forward now to hearing what my learned colleagues have to say. Thank you so much.
Gosh, Fiona, where to start? I was just taking notes as you were speaking, and there's often sort of a debate about what are the differences between men and women in their leadership styles, and we could go through that till the cows come home. But if I just read out some of the words and the principles that you spoke in the last 20 minutes, I think it brings us somewhere fairly obvious. Words like kindness, empathy, and compassion, love, safety, health, and happiness. The notion that failure is not the opposite of success. Vulnerability, honesty, justice, and trust are all critical. And the principles of teamwork, collegiality, self-care, and clarity around roles and responsibilities are all features of your leadership style. So you go, girl. Really, really quite an inspiring presentation, and I know you'll no doubt get several questions. But I will move on to our next fabulous speaker, who is Anna Marsden, an inspirational leader who I've known, had the pleasure of knowing for a number of years, and indeed attempting to emulate for several years now. As Managing Director of the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, Anna is a leading voice in the protection of the Great Barrier Reef. With 20 years experience spearheading organisations across the not-for-profit and creative arts industries, Anna brings unparalleled leadership to the GBRF's fundraising and project development and delivery, sitting on the GBRF's International Scientific Advisory Committee and the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Programme Executive Committee. And I can attest personally to her skills and insights that she brings to those projects. Anna's experience has been honed at some of the most iconic Queensland institutions, including the CEO of Queensland Ballet, the Development Director of GOMA, and the GM, General Manager of the Institute of Modern Art, as well as board positions with the Brisbane Festival, Brisbane Powerhouse, and Circa. Anna, over to you.
Hi. Change by its nature is dynamic and is therefore somewhat ironic that in the time since I was first approached to participate in this conference and offered up a title, yes, back in the old days, 2019, that my views on change have changed. Some of this is perhaps getting older and wiser. A lot of it is also because the change program I'm currently on at the Great Barrier Reef Foundation has settled a little. So we're probably jogging more than sprinting right now. And I can start to see the process of change rather than being consumed by the work. I have perspective, but also I think the events and circumstance of the last 2 years have tweaked my feelings about leadership and about change. We have all, every single one of us, undergone the mother of all change programs, and we're not out of it yet. I haven't had a complete departure from previous thinking, but I do think that the human dynamic in response to change, and of course our awakening to a critical purpose-led life, are things as a leader and as a citizen of this planet at this time are things I want to embrace and not shut out. And this goes to the heart of what you'll hear me touch on regularly as fundamental to leading a change effort rather than simply managing it. To understand, to empathize, and to respond to the human dynamic of change. So with that little preamble, let's get into this. I have 20 minutes to share about change, and I want to break this into two parts. A wild and quick ride through my change journeys, as each one of them has had a different energy to it and has inspired different leadership responses and, of course, learnings. And then to close, some ideas recently shaped over and even in the process of being shaped around change in this landscape, in this new world, especially from the perspective of the organisation and sector I sit in. And I should say our remarkable moderator, Karen, and I are partners on the same quest right now to protect our environment. So I look to her to challenge any ideas I have on this topic. So the journey so far. I joined the Queensland Art Gallery in 2000, one of the appointments following the announcement of the construction of a second gallery, the Gallery of Modern Art. The intent was for the gallery to use the momentum of this building program to fundraise for its remarkable contemporary Asian collection and build a donor family to support the bolder, broader vision of the gallery. The Gallery of Modern Art, or GOMA, as it is now known, was nothing back in 2000. It didn't even have a name. It was known as the Millennium Arts Project. Very inspiring. So the change program was to build something out of nothing. And within that building, to connect both sites, the original Queensland Art Gallery and the new GOMA site, to each other through a cultural philosophy, a seamless visitor experience, and a shared set of values. So let me break down that change program a little bit more, because on the surface of it all, it sounds rather rosy. You get a new building, great, just manage the design and construction of it, look at the expansion of the operation, throw a big party, cut the ribbon, hey presto, it's done. The nuance of this change program lay within the cultural shift of running two businesses, an old one and a new one, and ensuring that somewhere in this, you connect every team member to the master institution, that you anticipate the integration pain points of people working across two sites in deeply siloed departments, and embed with them a shared philosophy, a set of values, and of course, future success. Now, this two sites, one vision philosophy was not my job or my responsibility to deliver. My job was to build a donor family around the gallery and its collecting ambitions. But, and this is the cool part, given we are speaking at a Churchill Trust convention, when I applied for and was successful in securing my fellowship to travel through the UK and the US to look at emerging trends in fundraising at art museums, I was asked by the gallery to try and visit as many multi-site institutions as possible and look under the hood at how they not only raised money, but elegantly have expanded and operated. So what a gift to spend weeks within the Smithsonian and the Getty Museums in the States and at the Tate in London, understanding where a staff member's loyalty lies, to learn from the pitfalls that became ever present following the ribbon cutting party. And there were pitfalls. There is naturally a higher wattage of spotlight on new buildings, or the building with the nicer architecture, the more glamorous shows, the balls where the celebrities turn up. How does that play out on the staff? How do you compete with fashion and fame when you are trying to avoid having a favourite in the institutional family of assets, especially when you have not spent any time or energy investing in institutional loyalty? And what I witnessed was good and bad examples. Definitely the most successful was the Smithsonian, who had over time fostered a remarkable pride and prestige around the name. And yes, there were sites within Washington, within the Smithsonian family, that were obviously the winners. The Space Museum, for example, every day had queues at the front door and had a truly pumping gift shop. And then there were your more discreet sites. But in any case, as a team member, you worked for the Smithsonian, and that's where you got your pride. And this institutional pride and connective tissue was driven organisationally by a centralised management team who worked across the site and drove this connection. There had been an investment in the corporate brand, and the term Smithsonian meant something. And there was a heavy investment in internal comms. And this was a similar approach taken at the Tate. That only had 2 sites back then. Now they have grown to 4. And they've spent more time investing in institutional pride and engagement when they opened up their second site. It was a good case study to observe back in 2003, as the Tate Modern was still very new and shiny, and you could sense that there was an old team and a new team culture developing across the 2 sites. My engagement with the tape was not at a senior management level, so I cannot comment on whether this was something the organisation was aware of or had prepared for. How this manifested for me was seeing fundraising staff looking after donor needs that served their building and not really having any awareness or responsibility of the other building. It was subtle, but it was there. The two sites had been operating for 3 years at the time of my research visit. These insights, along with, of course, the fundraising learnings, were extremely valuable to come back to Brisbane and show in the Queensland Art Gallery. Back home, and in response, the gallery developed a visioning document for the new development called Two Sites, One Vision. And we spent a lot of time working through how we can design, embed and foster a single institutional culture within the growing gallery. One of the most, from my perspective, key strategies to achieve this was that staff were not allocated to a building. They all worked for the overarching Queensland Art Gallery. I remember a conversation quite clearly where we fought for all staff to have the same business card, not a business card for Quag and a business card for Goma. Furthermore, the entire senior leadership team, 14 managers from memory, were identified as the critical level of management for driving organisational integration. And there was a bespoke change management program delivered for this group. I was a participant and can testify the amazing impact this had on making these senior managers recognise the value in purposeful growth and expansion, but not at the cost of losing internal engagement or connection. And to close off this story, yes, there was a great party, a great ribbon cutting moment, and of the second site, Goma remains a remarkable and much loved cultural institution in this country. And as a test, if you run into anyone who happens to work there, ask them, where do you work? And I bet you they don't say Goma. They will say Queensland Art Gallery, but they are not referring to the building. What they are saying is they work for the institution. The second change project I was working on was for the Queensland Ballet. I joined Queensland Ballet as their CEO in 2011, and the story and gloss around Queensland Ballet today perhaps masks just how much this company has turned around. When I got the job, people actually phoned me to say sorry. It was an organisation barely covering its bills, not celebrated in the industry for the quality of its productions, and when looking at ticket sales, it was clearly on borrowed time financially. There is, I think still today, a national ranking of Australia's major performing arts companies, and of the 27 companies back then, Queensland Ballet was ranked 26th. The turnaround of Queensland Ballet was pretty phenomenal. On the numbers side, we grew the operational base from 5 to 15 million in 4 years, increased the subscriber base from 2,000 and falling to 7,000, and ended up being ranked 8th in the national ranking. We rejuvenated our artistic program and secured a new artistic director who happened to have a pretty cool backstory, which attracted a whole new audience, and the list goes on. It's quite easy to roll off this before and after, and for all it to seem like very much a fairy tale. And what I will say is that the turnaround, or the commencement of the turnaround, took 3 solid years, and the first 2 of them were pretty tough. I know many of you have had to either lead or be part of a change program, and they are complex and challenging. Once again, at the core of this change program was a cultural piece. It involved people. At the core of the QB situation was the fact that the people working in the organisation had lost their belief in the company, and more specifically in a belief that the company could be better. This erosion didn't happen overnight. It was a slow development, and a bit like the tail of the boiling frog. Consequently, the team didn't see that they had lost their way. They didn't even think there was anything wrong. But it was clear to see that the quality switch on everything had turned off. Near enough was good enough. Not making a target would be someone else's problem. And everything new and shiny had been next to impossible to achieve. It is hard personally and professionally to kickstart a company that has lost its way, because you are not just developing a strategy, presenting it and implementing it. You have a behaviour change program to deliver. And I confess I did not have the wisdom or perspective to see this as a behaviour change opportunity at the time, nor did I have the knowledge around human behaviour and how a set of driving and restraining forces are relevant to engaging in a behaviour change effort. So in full confession, and with the benefit of hindsight, I delivered an organisational change program very well. The numbers speak for themselves. But I delivered a behaviour change program clumsily. And it's clear now to me that this is why elements of this change program were so challenging, why it took so long, and we lost good people along the way. In essence, at QB, I managed a change program. I had not yet learned to lead one. So taking us back to a fundamental lesson when embarking on change, look at the dimensions of change: human, structural, organizational, and build a strategy around that. The way I have reflected on this change journey, and one of the things I wish I had done better, was to be kinder through this journey, to me and to the people around me. Sometimes it was easy to simply be the boss and lead my way, but winning the war is not everything. How you win the war also matters. And that is such an important life lesson for me, and one I'm so grateful to have the scars for. Despite this, it was a phenomenal turnaround story and testament to the strong foundations in which the new company and strategy was shaped, and that the trajectory of success and growth for QB has continued beyond me, as it should, and as every CEO would hope it would. When I left Queensland Ballet, it was because I'd run out of ideas and of energy and was looking for somewhere new to make a difference. And this is when I found myself making a third quite strange career step, moving into running a major environmental charity. The Great Barrier Reef Foundation is a parallel tale to Queensland Ballet. To set the context, the reef and the threats it faces today, and the ones we all know, have always been around, but they were a lot smaller and a lot less known 5.5 years ago. So when I started at the foundation, I found a really earnest group of people raising smaller amounts of money to do a lot of little things to help the reef. But again, they had set their sights and their ambitions quite low. All project funding was directed to science grants. The idea that there was a broader people-centric challenge or even a storytelling challenge around responding to climate change was not really known then, or at least not to us then. 3 months into my job, the first mass coral bleaching event occurred. And let me digress for a second just to give you a short science lesson. So what is coral bleaching? When water is too warm, corals will expel the algae, the zooxanthellae, living in their tissues, causing the corals to turn completely white. This is called coral bleaching. When a coral bleaches, it's not dead. Corals can survive a bleaching event, but they are under more stress and are subject to mortality. Try to think of a bleached coral as when your plants droop because of heat or lack of water. If you can reduce the stress, they bounce back, but left too long, they will die. So small pockets of coral bleaching has been recorded on the Great Barrier Reef ever since the 1990s. However, the mass bleaching event in the summer of 2016, where the world saw images of entirely white stretches of coral, occurred at a scale never seen before and resulted in 26% of corals dying across the reef. If this event was a one-off and the reef was allowed to recover, in a decade we would see almost full coral cover in the areas where the bleaching had hit. The problem is it wasn't one-off. Following the tragic bleaching event in 2016, the waters just didn't cool down, and when the second summer hit, there was a second mass coral bleaching event. In all, over an 18-month window, we lost half the coral on the Great Barrier Reef, the Great Barrier Reef being the size of Italy or Japan. That context, well, and that ends the science of my talk, sorry, that context is what drove the change program for the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. So you could say that the job that I signed on for became a very different job 3 months into the post. Someone threw this stat at me that there were about 50,000 not-for-profits listed on the ACNC that target cancer prevention, cure, treatment in some way. Well, the foundation back then was the only charity for the Great Barrier Reef. Quite simply, if we do nothing, we lose Australia's greatest icon in our generation. And the reality is we can and we will save it. And the foundation sat in a prime seat to do this. The crisis facing our reef was the wake-up call the foundation and its people needed to step up and do more. And we and so many amazing people and organisations are in the process of responding to this need. In the first year following the bleaching, our individual grew by 700%. We shifted our portfolio of funding 26 projects to 3 really key ones. We stepped up our communications to be really that voice of hope for the reef. And of course, we saw amazing results, attracted a lot of positive attention, and we were invited to brief Prince Charles on the state of the reef and then hosted his first visit last year. Amongst that momentum, we were also trusted to distribute and manage the largest environmental grant in Australia's history. And I won't go into the media and politics that arose from such an announcement. That's for a different time and would sit under a very different talk title. Needless to say, For someone who had just come off the back of 2 large change programs, I was faced with a doozy. On paper, the Great Barrier Reef Foundation went from an $8 million operation to a $70 million operation. We grew from 12 employees to 50. And beyond the organisational change, the reputation and brand of our charity was threatened due to us and the grant becoming a point of policy disagreement at an upcoming federal election. To explain further, we were contracted to build a framework and start investing the grant immediately and within a short window of time. But we were also very clearly informed by the opposition that in 12 months' time, if there was a change of government at the upcoming election, the contract would be immediately terminated and we would need to return not just the remaining grant funding, but seek to claw back as much as possible from any investment on projects that had been commenced. So it was a little complex back then. In addition to a pool of advisors that helped the organisation grow and deliver, the foundation had to essentially take on the behaviours and systems of a startup organisation. And so we did a lot of reading around startup cultures to try and build elasticity into the organisation. And there are 4 key factors that many successful entrepreneurs and leaders state are key to creating an ideal startup culture. Passion, the reason why work doesn't feel like work and why the long hours feel worth it. And it's what defines the existence of the business and acts as a great motivator for the team. Personality, just like us, it's what makes a business or an organisation unique, what cannot be found anywhere else. Agility, which is the ability for information and knowledge to flow at a pace that greatly improves all aspects of the business. It's the more visible factor, as it can be identified in the way workers work. Offices are organised and brainstorming sessions are carried out. And authenticity, which has to do with the freedom and respect of each individual's own identity. Bureaucratic companies tend to have processes for everything and a strict decision-making chain. The opposite is within the startup culture values. Interestingly, we believed we had these qualities when the organisation was still small, its before state. So for us, it was about protecting them and ensuring that when we onboarded new people, we help them understand and connect with our culture. And as I stand here today, we are 3 years into a 6-year journey to realise this reef protection ambition. And it is truly a remarkable program, the scale and breadth never before seen anywhere in the world. We're currently enabling 244 unique projects. But beyond that, and because of the culture, there is a healthy risk appetite to think differently and to pilot new approaches. And it's through this innovation lens that I believe in 3 years' time, we will be able to share really hopeful and inspiring news about our chances of delivering a more positive outlook for our Great Barrier Reef. I mentioned that I would touch on the difference of managing and leading change. The key difference between these 2 terms is that change management is the application of a set of processes, mechanisms and tools in enabling the organisation to transition from its present state to a future desired state. While change leadership is the ability to manage, lead and enable the process of change to attain that desired future and a state of well-being. The difference is culture. To create a culture that embraces change, rigidity and complacency have no room at the table. Just because something seems to be working, it doesn't mean you should settle into false sense of security with that particular model, product, or solution. Throughout my career, I've seen organisations get stuck. Look at the ballet. They had built their own narrative around why things were the way they were, and this had created a huge barrier for responding to external forces and opportunities. A foundation of flexibility established by leaders provides organisations with the license to adapt. When this is lacking, an organisation gets stuck and stagnates. Change management also requires empathy and the ability to make complex concepts simple to communicate. Part of being an empathetic leader means acknowledging that change by definition is difficult and scary. The primary goal is to pinpoint exactly how the change is going to affect people across the organisation. If you overcomplicate change, including the specifics of intentions or logistics of carrying it out, leaders will struggle to manage it and employees will struggle to execute on it. By making sure we crystallise the why of change, a clear vision and sense of purpose will shine through to employees. Again, this is why the foundation was able to respond to its change so well, because it already had a clear sense of purpose of our why. It had a mini change with the first Bleaching event and awakening, so we were primed for the larger change effort to come with the grant. Change is always on my mind, and I bet it's on yours. As leaders, we embrace it to remain competitive and hone our change management skills to create new opportunities for our organisations. The last 2 years have been all about change. We had budgets, plans, goals, and well-defined strategies about where we were headed for the year. When COVID-19 hit, we had to re-examine our intentions and recalibrate. And this meant rapidly assessing the risks, then pivoting to turn them into opportunities. And while I am clearly no stranger to change, neither is the team I work with, we are seeing the fatigue of this all start to emerge. Yes, we must always be evolving. But like I hope my 3 examples have shown, we need to understand the human dimension of our change. There has been compelling articles recently published about the languishing phenomena and the great resignation which is coming our way. To all leaders, these are our wake-up calls. The people you have a responsibility to help, guide, and enable, they are not at their absolute best. They are tired, they are questioning their place in the world, and they are languishing. My suggestion is now may not be the time to throw the once-in-a-generation change program to a team. But if you do at your peril, would you undertake that without a clear sense of the human dimension of change, making your people sit at the centre of the program and checking in and listening to the pace that they want to run at? It is the responsibility of leadership to communicate the change narrative clearly, for employees to feel connected to the purpose and aligned with the goal. They all need to hear the same simple story repeatedly and consistently. This storytelling practice, conveyed verbally and in a written form, generates transparency and reinforces key messages of the change. The components of a change management initiative truly exceed the sum of its parts. It has the potential to change your organisation and reshape it, as well as create new opportunities for individuals. And in the sake of a purpose organisations such as the ones that I've had the honour of working with, societal outcomes of solid, purposeful change is, in fact, a game changer. Everyone here does remarkable work for our world. We must all turn up and be brilliant. And we need those around us to be brilliant too. Change is good. It's tricky, it's tiring, but it's good. And as we end one critical decade and move into the next, even more critical decade, we must change to respond and to rise. I hope my journey of war stories, good, bad, and wonderful, help inspire you to see the opportunity for purposeful change in your journey and share some of the ways we can win our respective wars the right ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think in all the years I've known you, that's actually the first time I've heard you present. And it's not at all surprising to me after all our conversations that it was an incredibly thoughtful and analytical synthesis in 20 minutes of the complexities and challenges and opportunities that come with change. Again, some overlap with Fiona in terms of the types of principles that you're drawing on in order to be able to lead effectively: agility, authenticity, kindness, empathy, storytelling. I really, that resonates very much with me, the need to be able to tell the story in a way that is consistent and in a way that puts people at its center. It doesn't at all surprise me that you've put people and culture at the center of things when it comes to successful leadership of change. But related to that, of course, this compelling case you made that you need to be able to understand the culture that you're working with, and within that create a new vision, a shared sense of purpose, in order to be able to establish the institutional loyalty, pride, and engagement that's going to allow you to deliver on that shared vision. So I hope we're recording this. We should be recording it and then, frankly, selling it for a new type of leadership series. I won't hold up the time any further. I shall move on to Fiona Guthrie AM, who is our next speaker. Fiona is the CEO of Financial Counselling Australia, the peak body for financial counsellors. She was the recipient of a Churchill Fellowship in 2014 and has held directorships on a number of bodies, including the Financial Ombudsman Service. And she was previously chair of ASIC's Consumer Advisory Panel. Fiona is currently a member of the ACCC's Consumer Consultative Committee and on the boards of Choice and Way Forward. Fiona was made a member of the Order of Australia in 2017 for her work in social welfare and financial counselling. Fiona, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Karen. Could I also begin by thanking Marucci for her warm welcome to country? I'm here in Melbourne on the lands of the Boonwurrung people. I have the privilege of working with a lot of First Nations people in my job as colleagues and as clients, and I wanted to particularly acknowledge the resilience of First Nations people and the incredible spirit that I see every day. I also want to thank Ken and the committee for having the bravery to keep on keeping on with this conference, which is quite extraordinary, and also Jill Bannon, who's the organiser behind all this, who I think is probably one of the most patient people in the world, particularly with me. So thank you, Jill. So I'm going to start with one of my favourite stories about Churchill, and it's a very well-known one. It's about the time he was asked to speak at his old school. He moved to the lectern. He paused for a few moments. As we know, he spoke very slowly, and he said just 6 words: never, ever, ever, ever give up. And then he sat down. Now, we don't know whether that story is true or not. If it's not true, it should be, or if the quote is exactly right, because it doesn't really matter. It's such a great lesson about leadership, and that is that we should never give up. And I love it. And Churchill is famous for his great leadership during the Second World War. And it's been said that the coronavirus pandemic is our generation's equivalent. So what I want to talk to you about today are some observations about leadership during lockdown. Now, I'm particularly well qualified to talk about that, since I'm coming to you today from Melbourne, which now has the honour of being the most locked down city in the world. And of course, I would have been in Brisbane. I spend as much time in Brisbane as I can. It's my hometown, but work takes me to Melbourne together with my partner. So here I am, locked down in Melbourne. So what have I observed about that? Well, one of the things I've observed, I think, is that each of us plays some sort of leadership role during lockdown. It might be in your own workplace, or it might be in your family. It is almost certainly in your community. So what's it taught us about leadership? I think I'm going to go over some very similar themes to Fiona Hawthorne and Anna Marsden, absolutely brilliant speakers. Maybe I use some different words, but very similar things. Here are 5 that I have observed over the last couple of years. I want to start with an observation. Someone said this to me the other day and I really liked it. It's very easy when you're sitting in the Colosseum to tell other people how to avoid the lions. It's very easy when you're sitting in the Colosseum to tell other people how to avoid the lions. Because as a leader, I think sometimes it does feel like you're in a lion's den. But if you run away from them, it's not going to work. They'll catch you. And it's generally better not to sacrifice your colleagues, hoping the lions will get to them first. So my first point, and I think this is a theme again from Anna and the other Fiona, is that sometimes you just have to stand your ground. You have to stand and fight. Such an important quality in a leader. And there are always going to be people telling you what to do, but you've got to make up your own mind and you've got to stand for something and stand for that. And that brings me to my second point. And that is that shouting never strengthens your argument. In the pandemic, we've had to deal with a lot of shouting. We've had to deal with the anti-vaxxers, the anti-lockdown protesters. But yelling at people doesn't get them to change their minds. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't call out poor behaviour, because that is never, ever acceptable. Here in Melbourne, we've had protesters, they've had them in Sydney, you've had a little bit of that in parts of Queensland. But as someone said to me once, you never learn anything if you only talk to people you agree with. So the key is surely to have debates in respectful ways. And with so many challenges facing Australia, recovering from the pandemic, climate change that Anna is dealing with, we just have to listen to each other. It is so important, and I think that's been reinforced during these last couple of years. My third point is this: tell a lie once and all your truths become questionable. What has been crystal clear during the pandemic has been the importance of honesty. Facts really matter. We need leaders who tell the truth about the seriousness of COVID, about vaccines, about life after lockdown. It goes to trust, because trust and honesty are two sides of the same coin. And as a leader, it's so critical that you're honest with people, that you tell them the truth, and you base that truth obviously on facts. My fourth point is the one I want to spend the most time on. And what I think we have learnt during lockdown is that good leaders can change people's lives for the better. And indeed, when you stop and think about it, isn't that the essence of what leadership is about? To bring out the absolute best in the people you lead. And if you're a leader in politics, to leave Australia a better place. And for me, what we saw in the pandemic was that our leaders could make decisions that would change people's lives for the better. Now, it might be a well-worn refrain, we're all in this together, but it's well-worn because it's really true. And the best example in my mind is that just for a moment in the pandemic, we stopped the us and them rhetoric. And in my world, the utterly unfair demonisation of people on welfare. So back in 2019, before the pandemic, there were around 720,000 people who were unemployed. And there was one job for every 8 people. Now, you don't need to be a maths genius to work out that those numbers don't add up. Yet so much of our public discourse blamed people for not having work. And that in turn allowed us to turn a blind eye to the fact that unemployment benefits were just woeful. A single person was living on $282 per week. You cannot afford rent and food and electricity and medications on $280 per week. So when the government doubled unemployment payments last year during the first wave of the pandemic, it literally lifted hundreds and thousands of people out of poverty. It was transformational for the people we work with in financial counselling. So financial counsellors, sometimes confused with financial advisors, completely different. Financial advisors help people who've got money to invest. We help people who are struggling with bills and debt, and we work in community organisations. We provide advice and support to people experiencing financial hardship. And my Churchill Fellowship in 2014 was looking at debt advice, financial counselling in the United States and the UK, and bringing those lessons back to Australia. So at the start of the pandemic, we expected demand for financial counselling would absolutely go through the roof. And in fact, the opposite happened. Our services, financial counselling services, had never been so quiet. And why? Because suddenly people had enough money to live on. So what we have learned in the pandemic is that good leaders can change people's lives for the better. We should have an Australia where we have the explicit aim for full employment, not one where there are not enough jobs to go around. We should have an Australia where if you can't get a job or you're sick, then you still have enough money to live, not one where people and children live in poverty. And we should have an Australia where men and women share the parenting. And that would happen if we had adequate parental leave and adequate childcare, not one where men miss out on helping their children grow up and where women's economic security is compromised because of their childbearing and child rearing responsibilities. Now, all of these things work on 2 levels. They're social changes and they're economic changes, and they bring economic benefits. And we saw some of those during the pandemic. To go to my last point around childcare, the Grattan Institute estimated that cheaper childcare would cost $5 billion per annum, but it would boost GDP by about $11 billion per annum. These are the kind of things that leadership could and should deliver, not more of the same. We do not want to go back to the same old Australia we were after having gone through all this pain. We do not want to lose this opportunity. So before I turn to my final point, I just want to pause for a moment and summarise what I've said about leadership in lockdown. I've said how when you're in the lion's den, sometimes you have to stand your ground. Leaders have to stand and fight. That doesn't mean that you have to shout and point to win your argument. Leaders have to bring people along, particularly people with whom you do not agree. You have to listen to them. In doing that, honesty and truth are just fundamental. And surely if leadership is about anything, it is about changing people's lives for the better. And I'd probably add kindness here. It's a particularly something I am really passionate about. If we're all just kinder to each other, that the world would be such a better place. And I love that in the previous speakers' presentations. So my final point is to return to where I started with Winston Churchill's aphorism, never give up. Now, personally, at times over the past 2 years, I have felt like giving up. It has been really hard. The organisation I work for had 1 million balls in the air and we had to juggle all of them from lockdown. There were long hours, the days blurred into each other. Some of the projects that we were putting in place and leading for our sector brought criticism from some parts. Other people were happy. It was very difficult to navigate. I did feel like giving up. And I kid you not that what kept me going at times was to remind myself of Churchill's words, never give up. Because we owe it to the people we work with, we owe it to our families, and we owe it to our community, because that's what leaders do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. If you are looking for a new job, could I suggest politics? The country could do with more leaders like you with those sentiments in mind. I'm going to take you straight back to where you started, which was standing your ground in the lion's den. 30 seconds for an anecdote. I started this job in May last year. I moved from academia to government, and about 2 months in the job, we were in the middle of pandemic. We were about a month and a half out from an election. It had been a bruising term. And I was asked to, well, in fact, I held a retreat, but I was asked to speak to how I felt at the beginning about the job, the sector, the sort of the role I'd taken on. And I put up a photograph of a wildebeest being savaged by a lion. And there was general laughter, as you'd expect. And someone said, "Are we the wildebeest or the lion?" And I said, well, that depends on what part of the organisation you're in. Right now, I feel like the wildebeest. But it was my attempt at saying this is dog eat dog or lion eat wildebeest. And I think we all need to be a little bit kinder to each other and go back to first principles and just reflect on what it is we're trying to achieve as public servants. So what you've said, Fiona, certainly resonates once again with me. Now, over to our next speaker, who is Brit Anderson. Thank you so much, Brit. What a wonderful exposition of how design, architecture, and the intrinsic value of nature can coalesce to serve a public and a social good. The early part of your presentation does raise interesting questions about the sort of the relative role and responsibility of the state vis-a-vis donors and philanthropists, but I'll leave that for another time. Before I introduce Joe, just a reminder to the audience to please pop your questions in the live Q&A tab, which is at the bottom of your screen. And if you are directing your questions at a particular presenter, please do just pop their name at the beginning of it to make it clear. Joe, lucky last. Joe Thomas is CEO and Creative Director of Metro Arts, Queensland's preeminent multidisciplinary arts hub. Over the past 3 years, Joe has guided Metro Arts through a period of once-in-a-generation change, redesigning the organisation's business model and creating the Brisbane Festival, Brisbane's contemporary circus company Circa, Queensland Music Festival and Bleach Festival, to name just a few. Jo has also worked in film, television and theatre and toured locally and nationally with her works. And of course, she was a 2012 recipient of the prestigious Churchill Fellowship. She holds a Master's in Fine Arts and Cultural Leadership from NIDA. Jo.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Turrbal and the Yagara people. I'd like to congratulate all my fellow presenters from this afternoon's group. a really impressive group of women, and I'm going to bring it home. So I'm going to pick up on that Masters of Fine Art. So a few years ago, I was invited to join the inaugural cohort of cultural leadership at NIDA in Sydney. And the selection process for the MFA included an interview with Australian artistic director and performer Robin Archer. The most difficult question in that interview: what is cultural leadership? It's a question I strive to answer every day of not only my working life, but my life. As for all of us, culture and art surround and envelop us, whether we're aware of it or not. Culture tells us who we are as a people, as a community, what we value, how we tell our stories, past and present, and how we might move forward together. Obviously, the last few years has been a time of confusion, anxiety, and pain. The arts as an industry was one of the first to go into shutdown, and as a result, we have seen devastation. Jobs, festivals, programming, and tours disappear with little or no support for some of our most at risk, including our gigging artists, crew, and arts workers. And yet, as Australia has isolated and distanced, the work of our artists has continued to sustain us through various modes of storytelling. And this is because culture never leaves us. Books, films, music, dance, craft, virtual concerts, and theatre, all of these practices have helped us survive in this time of isolation and uncertainty. I do believe in the grit and the resilience of the arts community. This ability of culture to bolster spirit and inspire hope and connect people has never been more important. And I know this to be true. And so I am continuing to call for greater support for the reopening of the arts industry, so we can continue to share stories and offer joy and entertainment for those coming out of hibernation very soon, hopefully blinking into the light. The pandemic, the shutdown, the economic challenges are not the only crisis for the arts or Australian culture more broadly. We are in crisis as a community until we can honestly look at the inequities and the prejudices we consciously or unconsciously continue to uphold. Through this COVID time, my colleagues who are Australian First Nations and people of colour have continued to call for attention to inequalities, just as we've been reminded that they cannot breathe. So how do we grasp this moment for change and reopen differently? How do we encourage everyone to ensure support is prioritised to those who haven't had any sort of a fair go? Surely if the pandemic has shown us anything, it is that the models and well-ingrained systems we hold up are vulnerable. We can change the way we live, quite radically. We can adapt. We can stay indoors if we have to. We can approach connectivity and socialisation and work in different ways. And so we can offer new frameworks within the arts to make radical change as well. Systemic change is possible. It takes leadership and willpower, but it can be done. In my sector, what is needed is a self-determined framework from our Indigenous artists and our artists of colour. This could be the key to changing our future. Investment is crucial in sufficient sums to enable long-term planning for sustainability and to see the establishment of venues and companies solely directed by our First Nations people and our people of colour. This will help us to see and hear authentic stories from all parts of Australian society, to ensure equitable and just cultural representation on our stages and our gallery walls. And as a cultural leader, I believe it's my job to offer my commitment as an ally, one who will support, but also one who will get out of the way to allow other leaders and voices in. Cultural leaders ask, what small steps can you take to move us towards radical change? And then let's dream that future into being, not just for the arts, but for Australia as a nation. I'm currently the CEO and Creative Director of a pretty special organisation here in Brisbane. It's called Metro Arts. And at Metro Arts, we work with independent artists to offer them a platform to witness, to testify, but also to challenge and to question, to console, to empathise, to inspire, to produce ideas that make new ways of seeing, thinking, and feeling possible. This is the driving vision behind Metro Arts as a cultural organisation, and I suggest behind the artists we work with and the art we present. We do not wish to gently snuggle up to the status quo because that's not our job. Our job is contemporary art, it's live and living art, it's challenging and experimental and diverse art. And in a time where not much is making sense in the world, I believe these art forms are the ones to articulate a new understanding and a new way forward. I come to this role as a cultural leader after many years of what we call in the arts industry a gigging actor. Certainly not famous, but I had enough work to sustain a career over 20 years in film, TV, and stage. The thing about being a not famous actor is you have to audition a lot and you get rejected a lot. Directors and producers talk about you as if you're not in the room. Everyone has an opinion on your performance or your hair, your weight, your height, your voice, your eyes, your teeth. You have very little agency. In film and TV, you're even referred to as the talent or sometimes a warm prop. You're given lines and directions and a mark on the floor, and it can feel like a really passive process. But when you're alone on stage and everything goes wrong, you're the one who has to improvise and keep the show going. And particularly in live performance, which I miss, there is no one to call cut. It's drilled into you from the very beginning that the show must go on. And so you learn resilience. You learn how to trust your gut. You learn to take risks and to think quickly and creatively. You learn to breathe. And you learn the power of a pause. Artists are some of the most intelligent, adaptive people I've ever met, and yet their value is frequently overlooked in Australian society, and I, for one, am quite sick of it. I am here before you today, a country girl, an actor from Toowoomba, who has somehow become an Australian cultural leader, a Churchill Fellow, and a Telstra Businesswoman of the Year. I'm an artist who, working with the team and board at Metro Arts, has led one of the largest private arts infrastructure projects in the country and developed a private foundation with over $6 million held in perpetuity and growing daily. And here I give a shout out to my fellow presenter, Dr. Fiona Hawthorne, who is currently chair of my board. Thank you, Fiona. This is what we've been working on for the past 2 years, and we've delivered it during COVID. It's been about significant change for our organisation, our local sector, but also the national industry, and it will mean significant flow-on effects for our culture. I'm now going to offer you some light observations from my life in the arts to hopefully give you something to take on your own journey. So, in the theatre in Australia, we don't say good luck or break a leg, we say chukkers. Chukkers. It's a very strange term, but it's one I hope you can learn to embrace. It's coming from the old days of touring repertory theatre where if a show was successful, the company would be rewarded with a chicken dinner afterwards, and hence chukkers for a good show. The arts are very big on networking drinks and particularly on opening nights. But what I've learned is don't network, forge friendships. Be genuine and curious about people because it's so much more interesting for everyone and you'll have much more fun. Imposter syndrome is something many of us seem to suffer from, In the arts, we say fake it till you make it. And this doesn't mean don't train, don't work hard, don't strive to be better. To me, it means keep trying and learning. It means realise everyone feels a little bit lost sometimes, and that's okay. We're all moving through time and space together, faking it and making it up as we go along. As modernist poet T.S. Eliot said, teach us to care and not to care. If I was to extrapolate this into performance or life, the caring is the work done to prepare, and the not caring is the letting it go. Improvise. Many years ago, I was lucky enough to work with Keith Johnston, a superstar of improvisation and creator of theatre sports. Keith says, being in the moment and saying yes allows action to move forward in situations and contributes to magical moments in front of an audience. It's the most marvellous thing about improvisation. You're suddenly in contact with people who are unbounded, whose imagination seems to function without limit. Unbounded imagination allows for extraordinary moments in life, so say yes to them. Now, in dance training, we learn to smile. If you slip, if you fall, if you forget the steps or you run into the curtain, no matter what, just keep smiling. And if your smile isn't enough, then we say try some high kicks and then jazz hands. I think that pain has a place in success. For years, I worked as a producer for contemporary circus company Circa. Our office was next to the training room where the acrobats would work every day. And one day, after watching one of our artists doing a bed of nails act, I asked her, "What's the trick with the bed of nails? How do you do it?" And she looked at me and said, "There's no trick, it just hurts." This same performer used to do a gorgeous act of walking in point ballet shoes on a tightrope. Now, this is already an amazing feat of concentration, strength, and balance. But watching her do this whilst 8 months pregnant was truly breathtaking. So no matter what shifts, changes, grows in your life, balance is essential. When I finish that tender, I'll feel amazing. When I graduate, when I win that award, when I land my amazing job, when I finish this speech, when I can finally travel overseas again, when I. And yet sometimes it seems to land a little flat, if you know this feeling. Last year, I was awarded 2 Telstra Business Women's Awards, one being for Best Social Enterprise and one being the big Queensland Telstra Businesswoman of the Year. It was very unexpected. It was wonderfully thrilling for an artist to be recognised as a business leader, but it wasn't quite as I imagined. Possibly it's because we're in COVID lockdown and my award and the prize and the flowers all arrived in the mail. The awards ceremony, the party was cancelled. There was no red carpet, no champagne, no speech. So in situations like this, you have to make your own celebration. And with the help of a dear friend that night, I did just that. I've also worked on producing fireworks at festivals over the years. And producing a good fireworks display is about rhythm, timing, musicality, and colour. And I think there's something in this. So I say, whenever, wherever you can, make your own fireworks. Celebrate the wonder of you and what you've achieved and share it with everyone. Things are going to go wrong, but that's okay. It's okay to change things up, to shake the status quo, to disrupt. Artists are disruptors. They're questioners and troublemakers and future makers. So be an artist in whatever way you can. Local author Trent Dalton wrote the novel Boy Swallows Universe, which just had a huge season here in Brisbane as part of Brisbane Festival. In the novel, a young boy, Eli, is asked by a journalist to tell his story in 3 words. What he eventually comes up with is poetic and it's epic. Boy Swallows Universe. And I love this as an exercise. Mine at the moment is gets up again. No matter what happens or knocks me down, I always get up again. So I throw that to you. What are your 3 words? Art has taught me about honesty, authenticity, connection, communication. It's taught me how to be vulnerable and compassionate and resilient. But most of all, art has taught me to look for the why in life. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this now? What am I wanting to say? What is the true inspiration behind me? So in wrapping up, I say to you, all of you, be a cultural leader and an ally. Breathe. Take a risk. Fall on your face. Lie on the bed of nails. Be kind. Fake it till you make it. Make your own fireworks. And when in doubt, smile or distract with jazz hands and high kicks. I wish a big chookers to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jo. I could listen to you all afternoon. You missed my favourite one, which was no snuggling up to the status quo. That's going to be my new mantra with the leadership team. Now, colleagues, we do have one question in the discussion forum, which is from, I think, is it Estelle O'Callaghan? Good Irish name. And it's directed to Anna. And I've just lost it because people keep moving stuff. Here we go. How do you plan and manage so many projects simultaneously and maintain strategic alignment? In 3 minutes or less.
Well, I mean, it's a team effort. That's what it is. I mean, I think one of the best things that Doug Hall, who was my boss at the Queensland Art Gallery, gave me the best advice is hire the best people you can afford. And he was the one that used to always say to me, if you can't afford a Maserati and a person, don't hire a Maserati. Sometimes you need a Toyota Hilux, and that's what you're going to get. But hire the best people you can, bring them into the vision, but then get out of their way, but always be hovering and be the net if they need it. And so, I get to stand and have these amazing stories, but there's this remarkable group of people. Typically, I've had the privilege of working in mainly 80% plus female environments, and there's not a more productive creature on the planet than a working mother, I will say. Team effort, but you have to find the ways to come together so you're all on the same page. But yeah, there are days, and I think to Jo's point, the work and the volume of work creeps up on you too. So, you look back and go, how did I do that? And I think if people showed you the brochure of your career ahead of it, you'd go, no, I'll go and work in a coffee shop, thanks. So these things creep up and then they become magical. But if you stop and breathe, to Jo's point again, you actually get to think, what a gift. So no tricks, just they creep up and you have great people who help manage them with you.
Would any of our other speakers like to answer that same question in terms of how do you juggle competing multiple projects at once and make sure somehow or other you're still being strategic?
I'll have a go because I expect all the time, so you should have a go as well. But Anna's right, of course it depends on the people that you have. But one of the things that we did better, I think, in our organisation over the last 2 years is we're really clear about what we're trying to achieve. And it was the outcome within our control. And so we, in our project plans, what can we deliver? And then every week we just track progress against it. And the other thing I think in our organisation is that everybody, we just pitch in. I run a very loose organisation. I probably couldn't do that if I had 200 staff, got about 30, I think, but I don't even know how many. And so everyone just does what they can do. And for those of you who haven't gone through lockdown, like we have so much, we discovered this online whiteboard called Mural, and it's just been a game changer. We love it. So Miro or Mural, they're just fantastic tools.
I have a question, if I may. A common theme, I think, through all of the presentations and your reflections related to the notion of kindness and empathy in your leadership styles. And indeed, even by virtue of the topics you chose to talk about and the way you talked about them, being able to reveal your own vulnerabilities. If that's something that you want to see permeate throughout the organisation, recognising that we should have leadership from every chair, is the way to achieve that simply by leadership through example, right? So we just have to continue to model that, and it will just disseminate and become a norm. Or do you think we need to be much more proactive and directive about the way in which we manifest that notion of kindness and empathy in the workplace? I'll pick Fiona Hawthorne to begin with.
I'm just staring off into the middle distance whilst you speak, and I'm reflecting on some times where I've had to do all of those things. So I think there is a need for vulnerability, but there is a need for that vulnerability needs to also be matched by sometimes people aren't paid enough to see you be vulnerable, and so in the teams you need to have a very clear understanding. I'm vulnerable with my leadership team. Yeah. But I'm not vulnerable with someone who is not paid enough to take the decisions that I'm taking. And so, however, kindness above all things, Fiona, kindness at all times, above all kindness. So if I am speaking with someone about performance management, I'm mindful to ask them how they're feeling. How do you feel working here? And so many tough conversations have been avoided by the response coming back at me to say, I don't fit, I don't think I fit. And suddenly I've moved from a challenging conversation to saying to them, how can I help you? However, you know, if you're getting up day after day to lead a team, as we all are, if you're getting up day after day to keep your stakeholders in line and to keep your strategic vision aligned, you're not being paid to be vulnerable. You're being paid to make decisions and to lead, and you are being paid to reflect on your mistakes. So I think the answer is it's in the grey. It's in that somewhere between both sides. Would be my thoughts.
Anyone else want to reflect on that? No.
Well, I'd love to. I've said something once, so I'll just be really quick. I think it goes to Brit's presentation about housing. I think one of the big policy failings is that we do not know enough about what it is to live in other people's shoes. And if you can consciously build kindness and empathy into your policy by asking people who make decisions to go and look at the impact those decisions will have on people. So ask people who have to make decisions about the rate of unemployment benefits, to go and talk to people who are living on them, to go and show them the social housing that women who don't have enough social housing that Brit was talking about. I just think we have just become so bubbled, and we don't mean to be.
But one of the things that I do is I teach, and I think you all can teach, and that's one way you can move forward. That you teach other people to be able to see what you see, and also to understand that they have it in them to join you in teaching others. It's a great way, I think, of sharing and enhancing your own particular specialties. You know, because one of the things we have to do is work with a lot of other people's desires and bring it together into one thing. So we're really having to be taking briefs, talking to builders, talking to planners, talking to engineers, getting people to contribute in a team, but we have to come up with the thing that is going to be in the end made. And I think in a way, that's what the artist does as well. In the end, it is about slipping on that banana skin occasionally and then coming up and having to smile or do the jazz hands or do the flip. So I think the teaching aspect, you talked about the mother and the mother being really the great model. Well, the mothers teach, and we women who are in positions of leadership we have an obligation to keep teaching. That would be my contribution.
Here, as a past academic who did a lot of teaching when I was at ANU, it was the teaching that was where I think we had the most influence and impact. But it was the publications, often publications that no one would read, and the people who were reading them probably already agreed with you, but they were the things that were valued. And it never made any sense to me.
And in architecture, it's the other way around. People want to see a better environment. Nobody's reading the papers about scale comparisons between the Greeks and the Romans. You know, that's just specialized knowledge.
Yeah, that's right. We have another question here from Estelle, and this one's to you, Joe. How do you keep or build a strategic vision and find support for it when you've been locked out of action for so long?
Yeah, it's been such a hideous time for most of our arts colleagues in Australia. And what we have found joyously is the philanthropists have really stepped up. The generosity of the Australian people has been in stark contrast, I might say, to the political leaders and their relationship with the arts. I think I would say to answer that question, that there is a lot of mental health issues in the arts at the moment. I see it in my team. I see it in the artists. So it's really challenging at the moment. But I believe in what I do. And I truly believe in the work that artists provide. This piece behind me is by Dr. Emma Lindsay, and it came from an exhibition about extinct animals. And you know, it's an environmental concern. I believe we can make change in the world, whether it be for animals, it be for our First Nations people, it be for our homeless. We can make a change. We just have to hold firm to that vision. And sometimes you really do just have to take a break. I've been burnt out this last year. Many of my team have been, and it's okay to say this is too hard right now and really switch off for a while. But I genuinely believe if you have that grit, the resilience, the belief in what you're doing, you'll find your way back and that vision will come.
Two more questions, both excellent. Why do you, I know they haven't said who they're for. I might give this one to, I might give it to no, you're from the, all of you, one of you answer it, because I'm not actually sure who it's best placed. I want to answer it, but I'm not going to. Why do you think creativity and new ways of thinking is perceived as a threat to many bureaucratic environments, and how could we overcome this in order to meet change potential?
Something to that.
Go on.
Just to be really naughty, I will say that I did meet a significant politician recently at an event, a few years ago actually now, and I said, you have a problem with homelessness. The arts and creative thinking can actually assist you with that. I'd like to come to talk to you about it. And this politician looked at me as if I had grown two heads and was an absolute lunatic. There was no understanding, I don't think, of the world and the contribution to community and culture. So I just think they're not embedded enough in this world, and that's part of our job, is to show them that we're not just sitting over there in a corner making wanky art. We're actually contributing to society and community in a really meaningful way. That's my 2 cents worth. Anna, go on. You've got something on this.
Oh no, I totally echo. I mean, I think shame on us if we sit around and wait for the politicians to give us permission, because we'll be sitting around forever. And we don't always have the resources to do it at the scale, but we demonstrate, we show, and they come along the journey at some point. But there is a huge community out there that are willing to leap into this stuff and see the power of storytelling. And I think we're in this beautiful, wicked moment where everyone has realized the fragility of life and how stale life feels when we're not connected. And I would say for all of us, creative, demons, who shame on us if we do not use this moment to catalyze the power of story and never be put back in the dark again. And so, and we're not going to get permission. We're just going to do it, and we're going to take the stage, and we're going to tell the story, and it is a reckoning and a renaissance is coming. And that's got to be it's got to be the legacy of COVID, is the arts, is the healer and the storyteller, and never again are the lights shut off again.
Yeah, agree.
Time is against us, ladies. Last question, but you're all going to answer it, but incredibly quickly, starting with Fiona Hawthorne. Who do you confide in to help you keep to a vision and balance?
My psychiatrist.
Fair enough.
But also I have a really tight-knit group of friends who really understand the sanctity of confidentiality, and understand they will often say to me, are you venting or are you asking for advice?
Yeah.
And when I set those contexts, I get what I need.
Yeah, fantastic. Brit?
Oh, I don't know. I go to different people for different needs. I go to the idea of taking a deep breath with the yoga, and I go to an old friend who used to be a student of mine, but is now in a senior position, who knows a lot about the limits of things. Obviously, I go to an engineer for engineering advice. So often I'll go to the people who I think have got the skills.
Fiona Guthrie?
I'm lucky I have the most amazing man in the world who's my partner, so I talk to him.
Fantastic. Anna?
I have two spheres. I have a group of girlfriends who've been my best friends since grade 3, so they know me no matter what I do. So they will always make sure that I'm me. And then in every place I've ever worked, I've been able to have a work wife, and I'll name her Teresa Fife is my rock star, and I love her. And you've got to have a person at work who you can shut the door with and cry and have a moment of crisis. And that's how you can take risks.
Yeah. And Jo?
I exercise a lot, and I also have a group of the most amazing women who keep picking me up and dusting me off and pushing me back out there again. So they really saved my life.
Ladies, from me and from the audience, a heartfelt thanks for your wisdom, your counsel, your honesty, your humour. It has been an absolute pleasure to hear from you today, and I hope it's not the last time we meet.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to all the presenters. As I expected, it was brilliant. I know most of you, and so I didn't expect anything less. You've set the bar really high for the rest of the convention. It was really enjoyable. I must remember to feel less overwhelmed by things and just smile, do some high kicks and practice my jazz hands. So if you see me doing that for the rest of the convention, you'll understand. I particularly like Fiona's slide of the burning bicycle, because this past week has felt like that for us. And it's been a peloton rather than a single bicycle. And we've been riding in unison, but totally on fire. We did get to the end okay. We did survive, so that's all great. Thank you again. It was really enjoyable presentations by everyone. We're now going to break for afternoon tea. You'll be pleased to know the wonderful afternoon tea we had arranged for you has been donated to the Wesley Mission. So it hasn't gone to waste, so that's all good. I'll duck off and get a cup of coffee, and we'll reconvene at 3:30. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon.